Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village School by Miss Reed. Chapter 16, April Birthday Party. April had come, one of the most beautiful within living memory. The long spell of sunshine and the unusually warm nights had brought early rows of carrots and peas and sturdy broad beans into all the cottage gardens. "Unseasonable," announced Mr. Willett. "We'll pay for it later, mark me now. Just get the fruit blossom out, and there'll be a mort of frosts. Seen it happen time without number." He seemed to gain some morbid satisfaction from this augury. The children were glorying in it, and were already tanned and freckled. They came in from the playground and spread their hot arms along the cool wood of the desks. They sniffed luxuriously at the warm, biscuity smell that the sun had drawn from their scorched skins. In a week's time, the Easter holidays would begin, and I hoped that the fine weather would hold, for my garden was weedy and the hedges, usually clipped at the beginning of May, were already needing attention. On this particular afternoon, the girls were busy with their sewing, and the boys were making raffia mats or cane baskets or bowls according to their ability. The last few stitches were being put by Linda Moffat into a kettle holder of especial importance, and as the other children worked, they watched Linda with excitement. The kettle holder was their own present to Miss Clare, who celebrated her birthday that day. All the children in the school had put several stitches in it, some, I fear, which Miss Clare would privately think of as cat's teeth, and I had promised to take it to her when I went to her tea party that afternoon. Linda cut the cotton with a satisfying snip of the scissors and came out to the front of the class bearing it as if it were the Holy Grail itself. It certainly was a magnificent object, made of a piece of vivid material in deep reds and blues of a paisley pattern. It was edged with scarlet binding and had a rather bumpy hoop to hang it by. Linda held it up for the children to admire, and they looked at it with reverence. "That's done real good. Don't it look good? Miss Clare'll like that all right. Even if she's got a little old kettle holder, she can always do with another one." They nodded wisely to each other, exchanging sagacious remarks like old women at a market stall. John Burton, who was the neatest-fingered child, had the enviable task of wrapping it in tissue paper and tying it with a piece of red raffia. The children, handwork neglected, clustered round his desk to watch the delicate operation and to give advice. "You pulls too tight, mate." "He's right, you know. You'll have it all twizzled up inside." "If you leaves it to me," said John soberly and without any rancor, "I'll do it all right. It ain't no good getting excited like when you do's particles." He tied a neat bow with unhurrying fingers and put it in a prominent position on top of the piano so that they could gloat over it until it was time to go home. There were 4 of us sitting at Miss Clare's round table that afternoon. A cloth of incredible whiteness, bordered with a deep edging of Miss Clare's mother's crocheting, covered the table, and in the middle stood a bowl of primroses. The best tea service, patterned with pansies, was in use, and cut glass dishes held damson cheese and lemon curd of Miss Clare's own making. The bread and butter was cut so thin as to be almost transparent. "I've a special old carving knife," explained Miss Clare earnestly, "and I always sharpen it on the bottom step up to the lawn. It's really quite simple." The kettle holder had been much admired and hung on a hook by the fireplace. Miss Clare glanced at it fondly from time to time. "I shan't dirty it, you know. I've an old one I shall use. No, I really don't feel I could soil that one." Miss Gray and Mrs. Finch Edwards were with us, and the conversation turned to Miss Gray's new home. "No complaints anywhere," she announced Miss Gray, "except perhaps overfeeding. She's a wonderful cook." "And dressmaker," added Miss Clare, peering into the depths of the teapot. "She's making me some silk frocks," began Miss Finch Edwards, then stopped suddenly. Her face became a warm red, and she crumbled her cake. For any special occasion? Asked Miss Gray, who seemed unaware of her neighbor's sudden shyness. Mrs. Finch Edwards looked up from her crumbling. I want them in September. That is, my hubby and I looking forward to a baby then. We were all delighted, and a hubbub of questioning broke out about knitting needs, the desirability of real wool for first-sized vests, no matter what time of year the baby was born, the advantages of high prams over low prams, and draped cots over plain ones, until it dawned on us three spinsters how fervent we were being with our advice to the only member of the party who, presumably, knew more about the business than the rest of us put together. The tea party gained immensely in hilarity and animation after this disclosure, Miss Clare even going so far as to scold her guest for cycling over in her present state, very naughty indeed, and she was inclined to get her brother to take her back in his car. While we were thus cozily gossiping, Mr. Annett came up the path with a basket of eggs. Mrs. Partridge helped at the Women's Institute stall for 2 hours each market day, and I used to see the vicar's ancient car nosing its way round the bend by the school just before 10 each Thursday morning. In the back would be piled Fairacre Women's Institute's contributions. During the holidays, Miss Clare had always enjoyed helping the vicar's wife, and now, having retired, she helped regularly at the stall. On their way, they would stop at Beech Green School. Mr. Annett's older boys produced a weekly supply of eggs, vegetables, herbs, and flowers, which were sold on a stall in the market, belonging to a local market gardener. With the proceeds, they bought seeds, plants, netting, tools, and so on to carry on this good work. By the time the boys had loaded up their products, Miss Clare and Mrs. Partridge would be seated in a bower of greenery, peering above bunches of scrubbed carrots and turnips and feeling for the gears among the cabbages. At this time of year, the school garden was not producing enough to be sent in, so that Mr. Annett brought the eggs to Miss Clare to pack with hers overnight to save the car stopping again. He sat himself down by Miss Gray and ate birthday cake. He looked very much more relaxed and happy, and could be called almost good-looking. I decided this as he smiled at his neighbor. If only he were fed properly and did not drive himself so hard at everything. If only he could find a thoroughly nice wife. I found myself looking at Miss Gray speculatively and pulled myself up sharply. Really, I was quite as bad as nurse. But for all that, I was glad to see how very much at ease they were in each other's company, and although I didn't go so far as to name their children for them, I must admit that I was favoring a draped, creamy wedding dress for Miss Gray rather than a white, when Miss Clare brought me back to earth by inquiring kindly if I had found the cake perhaps a trifle too rich. The children were busy copying a notice from the blackboard. It said, "Spring term ends on April 9th. School will reopen on Tuesday, April 28th. Pens were being wielded with especial care, for their parents would receive these joyous communications, and the children were aware that criticism, kindly or adverse, would greet their handwriting. My class had to do 2 copies apiece. The best writers might even have the honor of writing a third, for Miss Gray's children could not yet be relied upon for a fair copy, and the older children would supply theirs. As they rattled their nibs in the inkwells and thumped their blotting paper with fat fists, I marked the compositions which had been written that morning. The subject was "A Hot Day." John Burton, who has a maddening habit of transposing letters, had written, "A hot day. I feels tried when it is hot. I likes it best to be just rigget, and not too hot nor too clod. I wears my thin clothes when it is hot, and my shaddy linen hat we bought at jumble sale. It is a treat." I called him to my desk and corrected this piece of work while he watched. "You must make an effort with these GHT words," I told him, writing bought and right for him to copy 3 times. I explained yet again the intricacies of TO, TOO, and TWO, and wrote too hot and too cold to be copied thrice. There's been much discussion recently on the methods of marking compositions. Some hold that the child should be allowed to pour out its thoughts without bothering overmuch about spelling and punctuation. Others are as vehement in their assurances that each word misspelt and incorrectly used should be put right immediately. I think a middle course is best. On most occasions, I correct and mark the work with the child by me, explaining things as I did to John. But sometimes I tell the children before they begin that I want to see how much they can write, and although I should appreciate correct spelling, I would rather they got on with the narrative and spelled phonetically than hold up their good work by inquiring how to spell a particular word. In this way, I can assess any literary ability more easily and encourage that fluency, both written and spoken, which is so sorely lacking in this country school. As a rule, the girls find it easier to express themselves than the boys. Their pens cover the page more quickly, and they use a wider choice of adjectives, make use, too, of imagery, which the boys seldom do. The boys' essays are usually short, painstakingly dull, and state facts. John Burton's account of a hot day is a fair example of the boys' attempts. Kathy's contribution on the same subject made much more interesting reading. A hot day. There are no clouds today, and we shall have PT in the playground, which I like. I like to run and jump and feel the wind through my hair. But I hope Miss Reed does not make us sit with our legs crossed up for exercises because my knees get all sticky at the back on a hot day. On the way home, we all walk in the shade by the hedge. The cows stand under the trees and swish their tails to keep the flies off. My mother likes hot days because her washing bleaches white as snow, much whiter than the flowers on the elder bush where she always spreads out our hankies. Everyone is happy when the sun shines on a hot day. The glorious weather continued unbroken, and here in the schoolroom were all the tokens of an early spring. The nature table against the wall bore primroses, cowslips, and bluebells. The tadpoles were growing their legs with alarming rapidity, and were due to depart any day now, for the pond. The weather chart pinned on the wall above the table showed a succession of yellow suns bright as daisies, and out in the lobby a few cotton hats and light cardigans were an indication of the heat. To Mrs. Pringle's well-disguised gratification, the stoves had been unlit for 2 or 3 weeks, and the most that she could find to grumble at was the wallflower petals that fluttered from the jug on the window-sill to the door. After the hard winter, it seemed an enchanted time, and the reading of The Wind in the Willows on those blissful afternoons matched both the freshness and youth of the listeners and the spring world outside. Through the partition, I could hear the hum of Miss Gray's class at work. She seemed happy and in better health than when she had arrived. Mrs. Moffat had turned out to be the perfect landlady, and was herself much happier now that she had an appreciative lodger to admire her cooking, needlework, and the other domestic virtues which her husband was apt to take for granted. I hoped very much that Miss Gray would stay with me at Fairacre School. The children adored her and responded well to her quiet but cheerful manner. I could see that she was providing for them, as Miss Clare had done, an atmosphere of security and peaceful happiness in which even the most nervous child could put forth its best. With her top groups reading, particularly, she had worked well, and I was looking forward to having them in September in my class, confident that they would be able to hold their own with the older children. It was a fortunate day indeed, I told myself, when Miss Gray was appointed to Fairacre School, and I hoped that she would stay with us for many years. A small doubt arose in my mind, wordless, but shaped like a question mark. Well, naturally, if that happened, I answered aloud, and had to change the mutter to a cough as the children's eyes met mine in some bewilderment. April 9th came at last, and the excitement of the last day of term kept the children chattering like starlings. As I was giving out the hymn books for morning prayers, Eric appeared at the door with his father behind him. Mr. Turner was carrying in his arms a small girl who could not have been more than 3 years old. He looked disheveled and agitated and motioning Eric to his desk, I went to the lobby with his father. "Come to ask you a favor, miss," he began anxiously, dumping the child by his knees. She put one arm around his leg and looked up at me wonderingly. "If you want me to have your daughter for the day," I answered. This sort of emergency crops up occasionally, and I always enjoy these diversions. "I shall be very pleased indeed." Mr. Turner looked relieved and grinned down at the upturned face. "Hear that, Duck? You can stop at school along of Eric like a big girl, and I'll fetch you as soon as I get back from Caxley." "What's happened?" I asked. "It's my wife. I had to get Mrs. Roberts to ring up the doctor at 5 this morning, and she's been took to hospital. Appendix, they think it is, and I'm to go in early this afternoon. Mrs. Roberts would have the little one, but for it being market day. She's a good sort, been real kind, give us breakfast in her kitchen and all. And you too, miss," he added hastily, fearful lest I should take umbrage at his praise of Mrs. Roberts and his neglect of me. "I'm truly thankful, miss. You knows that." He fumbled in his pocket and brought out some coppers. "For Lucy's dinner, if that's all right." He counted out the money carefully, promised to fetch his daughter before the end of afternoon school, if he could get away from the hospital in time, and with a final knuckle-grinding shake of my hand, made his farewell. All through the morning, Lucy sat perched on the seat by her brother. Eric had been sent through to Miss Gray's room for a box of bricks, a doll, and a picture book, and these she played with very happily, keeping up a soft running commentary on her activities. The children were enchanted to have a baby in the classroom and made a great fuss of her, offering her their sweets at playtime and picking up the stray bricks that crashed to the floor. They reflected the attitude of the grown-up village people in their relationship to young children. I am always amazed at the servitude of these parents in these parts to their children, particularly the little rascals between 2 and 5 years old. These engaging young scoundrels can twist their doting parents round their fingers by coaxing, whining, or throwing a first-class tantrum. The parents thoroughly spoil them, and the older children are also encouraged to pander to their slightest whim. Sweets, ice cream, apples, bananas, cakes, and anything else edible that attracts the child's fancy flow in an uninterrupted stream down the child's throat, as well as normal meals and the quota of orange juice and cod liver oil, which is collected from the monthly clinic at the village hall. And I must say, in all honesty, that a more healthy set of children it would be hard to find. They seem to stay up until the parents themselves go to bed, and I see them playing in their gardens, or more frequently in the lane outside their cottages, until dusk falls. Then, sometimes as late as 10 o'clock of a summer evening, they finally obey the call to "come on in," which had been issuing from the cottage unheeded for an hour or more, and dragging reluctant feet, they resign themselves, still protesting, to bed. And yet, as I have said, under these methods, which are a direct violation of the rules of a well-regulated nursery, these children thrive. Furthermore, when they enter school at the age of 5, one might reasonably expect some trouble in maintaining discipline, but this is not so. They prove to be docile and charming, obedient and happy in their more restricted mode of life. The truth of the matter is, I think, that they feel the need of direction and authority, and if this is offered them with interest and kindness, they are more than ready to cooperate. They love to have an outlet for their creative ability, to be shown how to make a paper windmill or a top that really works, or to learn to sing a song with actions, to make a bead necklace for themselves, or a rattle for the baby at home, or best of all, something for their mothers, a paper mat with their own bright pattern adorning it. All these things give them infinite pleasure, because they have had an aim and they can see something for their labors. Their preschool play has on the whole been aimless. Their parents buy for them expensive toys, dolls' prams, tricycles, model cars, and the like, which have restricted scope in a child's hands. Sand, water, clay, and other creative media are not encouraged. "Too messy. Don't you go mucking up that clean frock now with that old mud," you hear the parents call. "Leave them old stones be and come and nurse your dolly. What's the good of me giving £1 for it if you never plays with it, eh?" What indeed? In the infant's room, Miss Gray was unpinning the Easter frieze of yellow chicks which had been the apple of the children's eyes for the past fortnight. Her cupboards were packed full of the objects which normally were stored in individual boxes under each child's desk. Counters, plasticine, chalk, felt dusters, first readers, boxes of letters, and all the paraphernalia of infants' work had been sorted, checked, and repacked. The dregs of powder paint had been poured away, and gleaming jam jars awaited next term's mixture as before. Vases were stacked in one shelf, and below them the great black clay tin, weighing half a hundredweight, had been packed with moist flannel to keep the balls in good condition for 3 weeks. The babies were busy polishing their desks on top and underneath with pieces of rag brought from home and a dab from Miss Gray's furniture polish tin. "Waste of time and good polish," was Mrs. Pringle's sour comment as she carried in the clean crockery to put away in the tall cupboard. On top of this stood a mysterious cardboard box, out of reach of prying hands. The label said "Milk Chocolate Easter Eggs" and was carefully turned to face away from the class. Each one had a small label tied on it, either blue or pink, and each child had to find the one with his own name on it. Miss Gray was to hide them about the classroom while the children were out at afternoon play. "Which reminds me," she said to me, groveling painfully under a low desk for a stray drawing pin, "I must see that they bring the eggs to me to check up on the names. It will never do to eat the wrong egg." In my room there was an equally interesting container, but mine was a round moss-lined basket, like an enormous nest, filled with eggs wrapped in bright tinfoil. The arrival of Lucy in our midst would mean a trip across the schoolhouse to fetch one more for the basket. We, too, were in a fine bustle, clearing up when the vicar came in at the door. His cloak and leopard-skin gloves had been put away with his other winter garments, and he presented a summer appearance in his pale gray flannel suit and Panama hat. "I wanted to remind you all of one or two things," began the vicar, when the children had settled back into their desks, and he went on to explain to them the significance of the next Sunday, Palm Sunday, and invite offerings of pussy willow and spring flowers for the church. He followed this by a brief homily on Easter, the significance of the eggs which they would receive, and the hope that they would be at church with their parents on both these days. He then spent a few minutes looking at the Easter cards which the children had crayoned ready to take home to their parents, and deciding that this was as good a time as any to present the eggs, I fetched 2 extra from the house and then passed the basket round. The children's faces were alight with joy as they chose their eggs, little Lucy having to be restrained from scooping all that were left into her pinafore. When it was found that there was one left, and I asked them if they could think who might like it, the children rose to their cue and as one man chorused, "The vicar, miss, the vicar!" And so, with great cheerfulness, we broke up, and the children of Fairacre School, clutching their treasures to them, clattered out into the spring sunshine, free for 3 weeks. And we'll pick up summer term next time.